fight.
Yeah, I think that obviously, I mean, that's true. Like from a perspective of like just the truth. I mean, he's not the type of guy that's just going to KO you in the first round. You know what I mean? Like it's just not really what he does, because he's really smart. Like he's very defensively sound. He plays really long. I think the leg kicks and like the oblique kicks and the head kicks and just the frame difference between them means that Ian Garry's probably going to play. He always plays the matador. Like he's never playing the bull. He's never like being aggressive and like trying to hunt you down. He like builds into a fight, and then in round 3, 4, and 5, that's when he gets a little bit more aggressive. That's where he like rocks people, like even Bilal and Prates or whatever. He had big moments against them in round 3, 4, and 5. I mean, Shavkat Rakhmonov, he gets his back in the 5th round. So I feel like if there is a finish from Ian Garry, it probably is in the 4th or 5th. So it's not ridiculous. I don't think it's ridiculous to say that. I guess that's what I'll say. It's not ridiculous to say that, but I also feel like, come on, bro, you're not finishing Islam Makhachev. Like, come on, bro. If you win this shit, it's by a decision. Like, let's be fucking real. Same with Islam. I mean, I think Islam has more finishing potential overall. Like, early on, he could snap up a Das. He's really fucking dangerous. Like, I think Islam overall is a more likely to finish this fight. But I feel like if this gets to round 3, 4, and 5, it's probably going to be a decision. Like, I think this will be a very close fight. Both of those camps have said the same thing. So I lean towards a decision. If you're asking me what I think is going to happen, I don't think it's going to be a finish from Ian Garry.
How good do you think is Ian Garry when you look at the rest of the division?
Dude, I mean, shit. Like, it's pretty hard to say he's not the -- 1 guy. Like, besides Islam, right? Like, he beat Prates. He had a really good fight with Shavkat Rakhmonov. Like, had more finishing type moments in that fight. You know, beat MVP. Like, he's beat all types of weird style matchups as well, which I think is really cool to see. Like, obviously,
in my ideal scenario, I want a 4th round finish. I don't want any early knockout, because then there's ifs, buts, maybes. There's excuses.
Ian Garry had this to say today. As you guys know, Ian Garry is a very, very confident kid. Islam is unchallenged as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. When you hear him say stuff like, I want a 4th round knockout because I don't want anyone to say it was a fluke. I love confidence. I love confidence. I love a guy that believes in himself and call their shot. What I don't understand though is sometimes a person is misguided in their thoughts.
See your ass fight 3 times in a year, but now you're lucky to see Islam fight once a year. It's just hard, but the fact that we get to see him, you know, fight Ian Garry, that's going to be a sick fucking fight.
Ian Garry, he's a guy that can get it done. Islam is one of the greatest to ever do it in this game. He's dominant in his field, and now he's at welterweight. Like against JDM, I thought JDM scrambling would give him problems, but nah, it wasn't the case. I haven't actually looked at that fight too much yet, but I'm excited for that fight just because it's like, again, another one of those ones where it's like destiny. A guy like Ian Machado, who's come up, had this dream to be saying, I'm the future.
August. However, it's just Islam is the mark of excellence in MMA. You know, you're talking about just a pro's pro who, even when weight cuts don't go right, he still finds ways to win. But for the most part, operates like a pro. You know, I think engages in trash talk without going insane. I'll put it that way. Which I personally prefer. You know, everyone's going to be a little bit different, but I kind of prefer that. But just in terms of like excellence, you know, can he wrestle quite as well as Khabib? Maybe not, but pretty close. And he can strike a whole lot better. He has fought, you know, very, very tough guys. I didn't know how 170 was going to go, and then it's just been what it's been. You know, I just think very, very, very highly, not only of his ability and his well-roundedness and experience, but his ability to, you know, remain focused on the goal at all times. So many of these guys, they get fat out of camp, they get in trouble, they lose focus, they want to do something else, the fire dies. And these guys from Abdul Manap's camp, man, they just stay grounded and keep hammering and keep hammering. And that's why they keep winning. And Islam is, you know, one of the very best to ever do it. A remarkable fighter, and, you know, can go and do a numbered event in the Middle East, can do one in stateside, and I think that is a degree of its own kind of value. Hugely important for that organization and the sport generally.
Totally. Yeah, I think, and a big thing now is literally starting with this fight, you can promote every Islam Makhachev fight as historic beyond measure, given this winning streak. I mean,
That's right.
With Anderson Silva, you could say this is a fighter who's never done anything beyond this point like it is. That's a huge fact.
I'm intrigued by this fight. I mean, listen, Islam, as you agree, I think most people do believe he's #1 pound for pound right now. So it's hard to pick anybody against that you believe is the #1 pound for pound fighter in the sport. But do I believe that Ian Machado Garry has earned this opportunity and that he has a potential to win this fight? I do. You know what I mean? He's long, he's rangy. Listen, you already said you weren't going to try to make it all one-sided. I mean, he's a smart guy. He's a smart guy. He fights intelligent. He stays committed to his game plan. He has beaten, Bilal Muhammad, Carlos Prates, Michael. I mean, he's beaten. It's not the same fight. Now, I will say this. I saw a quote where he came out and was like, I can beat Islam in wrestling and grappling. And I was like, please let that be a smokescreen. You know what I mean? Like, again, and I always say, we talk about it all the time. Fighters need to have an almost insane level of self-confidence, right? Like, you should not be getting into a steel cage with another human being if you do not have the utmost level of self-confidence. So I want Ian to feel that way, that he does have the ability to be there, but I don't want to see it.
I want him to get in his head. I want him to rattle him. I want Islam at the face-off to look away. Now, whether Islam does any of those things, right? It would just force Islam to rise. We could have some fun. Press conferences are only fun if there's a little bit of that sprinkled in there. Can we agree? Face-offs are only worth doing if there's a little bit in there. I just don't think that's what he's talking about. And I'm not getting the comparison. Now, I'm open to it. I'm open to observing this and updating you guys as we go and telling you, hey, that's what he talked about. Okay, he's doing, hey, remember when Conor did that to Jose? Okay, hey, here's what he's doing. Here's the playbook. I just don't know if that's what he means.
Welcome to Cage Theory, where we analyze the moments when destiny meets preparation in the crucible of championship fighting. When Ian Garry sat down with the media and verbalized something that most fighters only think in private moments, something shifted in the narrative around this fight. He didn't just say he was going to win. He specified the exact round in which victory would occur, the 4th round, and he articulated why that precision mattered. Not a knockout in round 1, because early finishes leave room for excuses, for ifs and buts and maybes. He wanted to dissect Islam Makhachev systematically enough that by the 4th round, when both fighters understood exactly what was happening, he would impose his will and finish the most dominant champion in the world. This wasn't arrogance without foundation. This was confidence rooted in a specific blueprint, in game planning so detailed that Garry had already mentally rehearsed multiple iterations of how this fight would unfold. Daniel Cormier watched this and recognized something dangerous. Not just confidence, but misplaced confidence meeting the #1 pound-for-pound fighter on the planet. But even as Cormier expressed concern about Garry's psychological state entering that octagon, something interesting happened across the MMA analysis community. Legitimate voices began to validate that Garry actually had paths to victory that weren't purely theoretical. Charles Oliveira, a man who had tasted Islam's dominance firsthand, a 2-time champion who understood the weight of being dismantled by superior grappling, sat down and picked Islam without hesitation. This was expected. What wasn't expected was the caveat Oliveira added. Islam's strength wasn't just his wrestling or his submission skill or his physical attributes. It was his discipline. It was his ability to execute a flawless game plan and stick to it for 25 minutes without deviation. Oliveira had been broken by that precise philosophy, a man who knew exactly what he needed to do and possessed the mastery to do it every single round. This revelation was crucial because it meant that beating Islam wasn't about having superior wrestling or superior submissions or superior striking. It was about disrupting his psychological framework, his ability to execute the plan. When Chael Sonnen entered the conversation, the analysis elevated beyond prediction into pathways and probabilities. Sonnen wasn't dismissing Garry's chances outright, but he was establishing prerequisites with laser precision. To beat Islam, Garry needed to accomplish 2 things in a very specific order. First, he needed to stop the takedown, not occasionally, consistently, across all 5 rounds against a man whose wrestling had improved with age. and whose understanding of position had evolved beyond the capabilities of most fighters to defend against. Second, and only after establishing that he could defend the takedown, he needed to go hard for the full duration. Maintain pace, maintain intensity, maintain offensive output for 25 minutes against an opponent who showed no signs of slowing down. If Garry could accomplish both of these objectives, Sonnen suggested, the entire conversation changed. The fight became balanced. Islam's predetermined advantage evaporated. This wasn't Sonnen being optimistic about Garry's chances. It was Sonnen providing the exact technical specification that would be required for an upset. The psychological warfare angle that Sonnen introduced added another dimensional layer to Garry's approach that transcended pure fighting technique. Sonnen wanted to see Garry embrace the McGregor-Aldo blueprint, the psychological dismantling that predated the physical one. Get in Islam's head. Rattle him during face-offs. Make Islam look away. Build the narrative in press conferences with enough precision that the mental weight of doubt started compromising Islam's championship composure. But Sonnen expressed skepticism that Garry would actually follow through on this angle. The comparison felt incomplete, and Sonnen demanded evidence before granting full credibility to Garry's stated approach. He was open to being proven wrong, but only if Garry demonstrated that he understood psychological warfare as an actual weapon, rather than just talking about it between fighters who are primarily measured on octagon performance. Khabib Nurmagomedov, the man who had shaped Islam's entire fighting career, offered a perspective that revealed something unexpected about Islam's preparation team. They weren't dismissing Garry as an inferior opponent who could be managed through superior wrestling and grappling. Khabib was acknowledging that Garry represented genuine difficulties that Islam hadn't faced before. The height, the range, the movement patterns that made Garry devilishly hard to grab. Khabib was candid about the fact that Islam would need to be more aggressive than usual, more relentless in pursuit, because traditional setups might not work at their usual efficiency. And Khabib dropped another detail that most listeners missed. Islam was pushing 35 years of age. This wasn't a slight against Islam's abilities, but an acknowledgement that time was a factor. Younger legs, younger recovery capacity, younger durability. These were potential advantages that Garry possessed simply through chronology. Khabib wasn't downplaying Islam's dominance. He was validating that Garry's challenges were real, but the question emerged immediately. Was Khabib being straightforward about the difficulties, or was he playing the role of the fight promoter who understood that hyping the challenger makes the favorite's eventual victory look exponentially more impressive? Khabib had promoted before. He was a showman. Floyd Mayweather used to do this exact thing. Enter the cage as a -2,000 favorite, then spend weeks telling everyone how difficult his opponent was, how this fight could go either way. And then, when Floyd dismantled that opponent as expected, the narrative shifted. Wow, Islam made that look easy against such a dangerous challenger. Was Khabib building Garry up deliberately to enhance the eventual impression of Islam's dominance? It was impossible to know definitively, but the pattern had historical precedent. The Sean O'Malley blueprint that Sonnen kept referencing became a focal point for understanding how Garry might actually defend takedowns against Islam. O'Malley wasn't a traditional wrestler. He didn't have wrestling credentials or a background in folk-style grappling or the kind of technical superiority that usually characterized takedown defense. And yet, O'Malley had managed to avoid being consistently taken down by elite-level grapplers. Sonnen watched multiple viewings of O'Malley's fights and still couldn't quite put his finger on the exact mechanism. Was it footwork? Was it positioning? Was it preemptive movement that made him impossible to grab? If Garry could decode what made O'Malley's approach effective, that knowledge could translate directly into defensive capabilities that Islam wouldn't be prepared for. But this was theorizing about theorizing. The actual execution in the octagon was something else entirely. Luke Thomas added texture to the assessment by acknowledging Garry's genuine capabilities while recognizing the mountain he had to climb. Garry was tough. His defensive skills were legitimate. His ability to identify and attack opponent weaknesses was sophisticated. But Makhachev's comprehensive offense, the striking, the wrestling, the grappling, the submission skill, the game plan execution, meant that even a fighter possessing all of Garry's strengths still faced nearly impossible odds. Thomas wasn't dismissing Garry as an easy night for Islam. He was acknowledging that the gap in mastery was still enormous despite Garry's legitimate elite-level skill set. This was the middle ground analysis that avoided both complacency about Garry and unfair dismissal of his capabilities. Mayhem Miller saw in Garry something that previous challengers to Islam hadn't possessed: physical dimensions and stylistic wrinkles that could actually create problems. Miller pointed to Garry's reach advantage, his ability to switch stances, his movement patterns that kept opponents off balance. These weren't theories. These were documented advantages that Garry brought to the octagon every single fight. But Miller stopped short of picking Garry to win. He was suggesting that Garry would give Islam a run for his money, that Islam wouldn't be able to simply implement his standard game plan and cruise to victory. There would be adjustments required. There would be moments where Islam found himself unable to land takedowns at predictable times. There would be sequences where Garry's reach and movement created genuine problems. But surviving those sequences and winning the round was different from actually losing the fight. When analysts praised both fighters as possessing a level of fight intelligence reminiscent of Georges St. Pierre, the comparison elevated the matchup beyond physical attributes into the realm of tactical chess. Both Garry and Islam thought the fight. Both understood positioning, range, timing, setup mechanics. Both had the capacity to study an opponent and identify exploitable patterns. This wasn't a case of elite wrestler versus lesser wrestler. This was a case of two high fight IQ operators approaching the octagon from different philosophical positions. Garry wanted to control the pace, build his offense, and accumulate damage through the first 2 rounds before unleashing more aggressive sequences in rounds 3 through 5. Islam wanted to establish control early, impose his will, suffocate resistance, and methodically accumulate advantages that became insurmountable by round 3. These weren't random strategies. These were the product of sophisticated analysis and systematic preparation. The reality of Garry's confidence, wanting that 4th round finish specifically, became more comprehensible when understood through the lens of this strategic framework. Garry wasn't just expressing hope that he'd miraculously knock out Islam in the early rounds. He was saying that his game plan would accumulate advantages so consistently that by the 4th round, when both fighters fully understood what was happening, Islam would be broken enough that a finish became possible. This required not just technical superiority, but psychological breakthrough. A moment where Islam's championship composure fractured under the weight of not being able to impose his will. Most fighters never generated enough offense to create that moment. Garry believed he would be different. He believed his striking, his movement, his range advantage would force Islam into positions where Islam's best tools became ineffective. But the prophetic voices across the MMA community kept arriving at similar conclusions despite their different perspectives. Islam remained the favored outcome. His wrestling was still elite. His grappling was still suffocating. His submission skill was still otherworldly. His conditioning was still world-class. The variables that would need to break down for Garry to win: Islam's takedown success rate, Islam's control on the ground, Islam's ability to execute game plan, were the exact variables that hadn't meaningfully broken down against elite competition. Garry would need to be transcendent, and transcendence doesn't show up to title fights on predictable schedules. It either happens or it doesn't. The probability favored Islam because Islam had already proven what he was capable of. Garry was asking to prove what he was capable of against the most dominant opponent possible to test that against. Charles Oliveira's final assessment circled back to what had broken him against Islam: discipline and execution. Oliveira had entered the octagon as one of the greatest submission artists in UFC history, a man whose technical prowess in jiu-jitsu transcended normal fighter capabilities. And Islam had simply ignored Oliveira's greatest strengths by never allowing Oliveira to dictate position or create the scenarios where submission attempts become viable. Islam's discipline meant he followed the game plan despite temptation. He didn't get drawn into scrambles. He didn't allow emotion to override strategy. He imposed his framework so completely that Oliveira had no choice but to exist within Islam's world. This was the core thesis that every analyst kept returning to. Islam wins because Islam controls the environment so completely that opponents have no choice but to fail in someone else's war. Garry would need to create his own environment entirely, and doing so while Islam was simultaneously trying to create his own made the mathematical probability astronomical. The legends had spoken, and their consensus was clear even as they acknowledged Garry's legitimate pathways to victory. Islam remained the overwhelming favorite because Islam had systematized excellence to a degree that most fighters never reached. The takedown needed to succeed. The ground control needed to be suffocating. The psychological framework needed to remain intact. These weren't assumptions. These were documented facts from Islam's career trajectory. Garry's path to victory was narrower, more dependent on flawless execution, more reliant on Islam making uncharacteristic mistakes. But in a sport built on percentages and probabilities, the fighter who needed fewer things to go right in his favor usually prevailed. And Islam needed fewer things to go right. He was the mathematician's choice. He was destiny made flesh. The question wasn't whether Islam was the better fighter. The question was whether Garry could be the one fighter who had already figured out what everyone else was still trying to understand. This is cage theory.